The afternoon sun was warm, and the small community hall was filled with the soft hum of people chatting, adjusting chairs, and getting ready for the weekend gathering. It wasn't a big event, just a simple local meetup where families, neighbors, and friends came together to enjoy music, food, and small performances. No one expected anything extraordinary to happen that day. It was supposed to be relaxed, ordinary, maybe even a little slow. Near the front of the hall, a piano stood by the wall. It wasn't new, but it had a gentle shine as if someone took care of it. Most people walked past it without paying much attention. A few kids tapped the keys earlier, creating random noise before their parents quickly pulled them away. By the time the event was halfway through, no one seemed interested in touching it again. A young woman sat at a corner table, quietly observing everything around her. She wasn't the type who tried to be the center of attention. Her calm presence made her seem almost invisible in the busy room. She watched the performers with a soft smile, but her hands stayed folded on her lap, as if she was used to being a spectator rather than someone who stepped into the spotlight. Meanwhile, a young man stood nearby, laughing and joking with a small group of friends. He wasn't unkind, just playful by nature. He liked making others laugh, sometimes without thinking too much about what he said. He noticed the piano and joked loudly about how anyone could sit down and play something simple. His friends chuckled, even though none of them could play more than a few random notes. As he continued joking, his attention drifted to the quiet girl sitting alone. She seemed peaceful, almost lost in her own world. Something about her calmness made him tease without thinking. He walked over to her table with a grin and said, loud enough for the nearby people to hear, "Hey, why don't you give the piano a try? It's not that hard. You just press the keys and pretend you know what you're doing." His friends laughed again, not out of malice but because they thought he was simply being silly. The young man expected her to blush, wave her hands, and refuse immediately. He thought she might shake her head nervously or act embarrassed. After all, that was the usual reaction when someone who didn't seem outgoing was put on the spot in a room full of people. But the girl looked up at him with steady eyes. Not annoyed, not shy, just calm. She didn't look offended. She didn't look nervous either. Instead, she gave a small, gentle smile. It wasn't the kind of smile that tried to impress anyone. It was natural, almost secretive, like she knew something he didn't. "I can try," she said softly. Her words stunned the table. The young man's smile froze for a moment. He hadn't expected her to agree. It was a joke, just a light comment to get a laugh. But now she was actually standing up from her chair, smoothing the wrinkles in her skirt, and walking slowly toward the piano. The small group around him exchanged surprised glances. One of his friends whispered, "Is she serious?" Another chuckled nervously. "Maybe she knows one of those basic songs." The young man wasn't sure what to say. He didn't want to embarrass her, but he also didn't know how to back out of his own challenge. It wasn't meant to be a real challenge. He had only opened his mouth without thinking, and now he had accidentally pushed her toward the center of the room. As she walked toward the piano, the people nearby noticed her movement and turned their heads. The chatter in the hall began to soften. Some thought she was simply curious about the instrument. Others wondered if she was going to play something. The idea seemed harmless enough, so no one questioned it. She reached the piano bench and paused for a moment, placing her hand lightly on the wooden surface. The room wasn't silent yet, but the sounds around her were fading. People nudged each other, whispering softly. A few kids who were running around stopped and watched. Even the volunteers serving snacks looked over from behind the tables. The young man stood frozen near the back of the hall. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a little guilty. It wasn't that he thought she would completely fail. He just wasn't sure she had ever played before. She didn't give the impression of someone deeply involved in music, at least not at first glance. She dressed plainly, sat quietly, and didn't try to stand out. She blended into the background so easily that he doubted anyone had ever seen her attempt a performance here. But she seemed comfortable as she adjusted the bench, pulling it slightly closer. She touched the keys gently, testing the sound with a soft tap. The notes rang out clean and clear. For a moment, she stared at the keys as if reconnecting with something familiar. something she hadn't shown to others before. The young man's friend leaned toward him and whispered, "Maybe we should stop her. What if she feels embarrassed later?" He shook his head slowly. "She looks sure. More sure than we expected." And she did. There was no hesitation in her expression. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply sat down at the piano like someone who belonged there. Her breathing was steady. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a brief second. People around the hall leaned forward without realizing it, their curiosity growing stronger by the second. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Nobody had even the slightest idea how much this moment would change the mood of the entire day. The girl who had been almost invisible since she walked in was now sitting at the piano bench, ready to play. And all because one young man had joked without thinking. But she didn't seem bothered. If anything, her small smile hinted that she had been waiting for a moment like this without even knowing it. The hall grew quieter. Conversations softened. Chairs stopped moving. Even the kids quieted down. A gentle calm filled the room, as though everyone sensed something unexpected was about to unfold. Then, with a soft breath, she lowered her fingers toward the keys, ready to show the room something none of them had imagined. Not even the one who challenged her in the first place. As her fingers touched the keys, the first notes came out soft and delicate, almost like a whisper. They floated across the hall, gentle and careful, yet full of life. People who had been talking quietly paused and turned their attention toward her. It was the kind of sound that made you stop and listen, even if you hadn't intended to. The young man who had made the joke felt a strange sensation in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He had expected awkward, hesitant playing, maybe a few wrong notes. What he heard now was completely different. She closed her eyes for a moment and let her hands find their rhythm. Each note was deliberate, controlled, but not forced. There was a natural flow, a sense that she knew exactly where the music was going. Some of the adults in the audience exchanged surprised glances. A few whispered to each other, "She's really good," and "I didn't know she could play like that." Even the volunteers paused their tasks, holding trays of snacks, unable to look away from the piano. The melody slowly built up, not in a showy way, but in a way that felt meaningful. Her fingers moved across the keys with quiet confidence, creating a story in sound. The room grew even quieter. Every little noise, the shuffle of a chair, the faint cough from someone in the back, seemed to fade. It was as if her playing had a presence, commanding attention without needing words or gestures. The young man's friends nudged him, their eyes wide. "Is she really that good?" one of them asked softly. He shook his head, barely believing what he was hearing. The joking challenge he had thrown was forgotten, replaced by awe. He had never thought that someone so quiet, someone who had sat at the edge of the room unnoticed, could suddenly hold the attention of everyone with just a piano. Her melody changed subtly, becoming slightly faster but still smooth. It was clear that she wasn't just playing random notes. She was telling a story. Each rise and fall of her fingers painted pictures in sound. People leaned forward, as if by moving closer they could see and feel the music more clearly. The young man felt his heartbeat quicken. He had never imagined a simple joke would lead to this. A room full of people, completely captivated, and all eyes on someone he barely noticed before. A few parents started to nod to the rhythm, their children watching with wide eyes. One older man quietly muttered, "I wish I could play like that." The hall was no longer just a place for casual gathering. It had transformed into something much more intimate, almost sacred. The piano and the girl had created a space where every note mattered, every pause held weight, and the silence between the music seemed as important as the melody itself. She opened her eyes briefly and scanned the room. Her glance was not one of seeking attention or approval. It was calm, focused, and almost serene. It was as if she was sharing a part of herself that only music could express. The young man watched, realizing that his joke had awakened something extraordinary in the quiet girl. There was no arrogance, no desire to prove anyone wrong. She simply let the music speak for her, and it was enough. The melody grew more intricate, Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and fluidity that suggested years of practice and dedication. Yet it didn't feel like she was showing off. There was a warmth in the sound, a tenderness that made people feel connected to something deeper. Some of the adults blinked rapidly, almost in disbelief, as if their minds were struggling to comprehend the talent in front of them. A few people instinctively reached for their phones, quietly recording the performance. They didn't want to miss a single second. But even as they filmed, they kept glancing back at her, unable to look away. The young man's friends were stunned into silence. One whispered, "I can't believe it. This is amazing." He nodded slowly, feeling both surprised and humbled. The girl had completely turned the situation upside down. Her fingers then began to play a softer section, gentle and reflective. It felt like a pause in the story, a moment to breathe and absorb the emotions hidden in the music. Some listeners closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried away by the sounds. The young man noticed that even those who had been talking or laughing before were now completely silent, lost in the notes flowing from the piano. He felt a strange mixture of pride and astonishment. Pride because he had accidentally prompted this performance, and astonishment because he had no idea someone so unassuming could create such beauty. She added subtle variations to the melody, small but meaningful changes that showcased her understanding of the music. The room seemed to lean in closer, as if everyone wanted to capture every nuance, every emotion she was conveying. There was no rush, no pressure, just an organic unfolding of talent that demanded attention. The young man felt a twinge of regret for ever thinking of this as a joke. This was not a performance meant to amuse. This was art, raw and genuine, and he had been foolish to underestimate her. Her music shifted again, growing stronger, more confident. The quiet girl was now the center of the hall, commanding the attention of everyone without raising her voice or demanding it. The young man realized he was learning an important lesson right there, about assumptions, about people, and about the power hidden within quiet, unnoticed individuals. The melody seemed to wrap around the listeners, drawing them into a world where words were unnecessary, and emotion was conveyed purely through sound. People's reactions were varied but sincere. Some were smiling, others had tears in their eyes. A few whispered to neighbors, trying not to disturb the flow of music. "She's incredible. How long has she been playing? I never knew she had this talent." The young man's friends could only shake their heads, unable to find words that matched the experience. He himself felt a mix of awe and embarrassment, realizing that his casual teasing had led to a moment that none of them would forget. For several minutes, the girl continued to play, alternating between soft, reflective passages and stronger, more energetic sections. Her performance seemed effortless, yet it was clear that every note was deliberate. The audience felt the intensity of her focus, the depth of her emotion, and the skill that came from years of dedication, all conveyed in a natural, unassuming manner. The young man watched, silently admiring her, no longer thinking of the situation as a joke but as a revelation. Then, almost without noticing, the hall fell into complete silence. The last notes lingered in the air, fading slowly but leaving an impression that would not disappear. People looked at each other, unsure whether to clap immediately, afraid to break the spell. The young man himself felt his mouth go dry, as though he had witnessed something sacred. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped, and the quiet girl at the piano had created a world that belonged only to her and her music. Even after the last note, her fingers hovered above the keys for a few seconds, savoring the silence. She closed her eyes briefly and took a slow breath, then gently rested her hands on her lap. The young man took a step closer, feeling both nervous and amazed. He realized he had underestimated her completely. His playful challenge had brought out a side of her that no one had seen before, and he felt a mix of humility, admiration, and surprise. Around the room, people began whispering and exchanging looks, their curiosity still high. Nobody wanted to break the moment entirely, but everyone wanted to express the shock and delight they felt. The young man's friends whispered to each other, barely believing what had just happened. "I didn't think it was possible," one said. "Neither did I," replied another. "She's incredible." She looked around the hall again, her calm expression unchanged. There was no arrogance, no expectation of praise. She seemed as surprised by the attention as everyone else, yet perfectly comfortable. The young man finally smiled, this time not jokingly, but genuinely. He felt a strange sense of gratitude. His offhand comment, made without thought, had somehow led to a moment of beauty, connection, and wonder that none of them would forget. It was clear that the quiet girl had transformed the hall with her music. And for the first time, everyone realized that talent could be hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting only for a chance to emerge. After the first few notes faded into silence, the girl didn't stop. Instead, she began again, this time with a rhythm that was stronger, more deliberate. Her fingers moved with a confidence that suggested the piano had been waiting for her all along, as if it knew the music she wanted to play. The melody she created was no longer just gentle and soft. It carried power and energy, yet remained controlled, precise, and full of emotion. Every key she pressed seemed to tell a part of a story that words could not capture. The young man who had teased her stood frozen, unable to look away. He had imagined many outcomes when he made that playful comment. Awkward notes, laughter, embarrassment. But this was beyond anything he could have expected. His jaw tightened slightly as he watched her hands glide effortlessly across the keys. He realized now that his joke had been misplaced. She was not just a beginner or a shy spectator. She was an artist, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to give her even the smallest reason to share her gift. People in the hall began to lean forward in their seats. Conversations had completely stopped. Even the children who had been playing earlier were now sitting quietly, wide-eyed, captivated by the sound. Some adults whispered to each other, their voices soft and incredulous. "She's amazing," someone said, barely moving their lips. Another murmured, "I never thought she could play like that." It was impossible not to notice the sudden shift in the room's energy. The air seemed charged with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and wonder. The girl's performance was no longer a casual exploration of the piano. Each note was deliberate, expressive, and filled with emotion. She added subtle variations, small flourishes, and delicate pauses that made the music feel alive. Her fingers moved quickly yet gracefully, striking keys with precision while maintaining a sense of natural flow. There was no hesitation, no false steps, just a clear connection between her mind, her heart, and the instrument. The room felt like it had been transported somewhere else, a place where only the music existed and everyone else faded into the background. The young man's friends were equally stunned. They whispered to each other, trying to process what they were hearing. "I can't believe she's doing this," one said quietly. "It's beautiful," another replied. Their faces showed disbelief mixed with admiration. The playful challenge that had started as a joke had now turned into a moment of shared awe. They realized that this wasn't a casual skill or a simple hobby. It was something far more profound. Her melody shifted again, moving from soft, reflective passages to stronger, more energetic ones. It was like she was taking the audience on a journey, leading them through emotions they hadn't expected to feel. The room responded instinctively. Some tapped their feet quietly to the rhythm. Others nodded their heads, caught up in the subtle rise and fall of the music. The young man could feel the weight of the audience's reaction around him. He glanced at the people near him and saw the same mixture of amazement and wonder mirrored on their faces. The more she played, the more it became clear that this was more than just a performance. It was an expression of her inner self, a part of her personality that had remained hidden until now. Each note conveyed emotion, joy, tension, hope, and a quiet strength that seemed to radiate outward. The music told a story without words, and every listener could feel it in their own way. Even the young man, who had started this as a joke, felt something deep stirring inside him, a sense of respect and humility for the quiet girl who had captivated the entire hall. As the performance continued, the girl added complex passages that required incredible skill. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision, Yet the music never felt mechanical or forced. It was alive, full of expression, and each note seemed carefully chosen. People's eyes widened as they watched her hands move. Some whispered in disbelief, "How can anyone play like that?" Others shook their heads, muttering softly, "I've never seen anything like this." The young man finally began to understand the depth of her talent. He felt a mixture of astonishment and regret. He realized how wrong he had been to treat her lightly, to assume she would fail or stumble. His joke had underestimated her completely, but now, in the sound of the music, he felt a profound sense of respect for her courage and skill. She wasn't performing for attention or approval. She was performing because it was a part of who she was, and that authenticity made it even more powerful. The audience, too, was completely absorbed. Every whisper and movement had ceased. The only sound in the hall was the piano and the quiet hum of emotion that seemed to radiate from each listener. The girl's music was like a bridge, connecting everyone in the room through a shared experience of beauty and wonder. People glanced at each other, some with tears forming in their eyes, others with smiles that wouldn't fade. There was a sense of collective amazement, a quiet recognition that they were witnessing something rare and unforgettable. Her fingers then moved to a softer, slower section. The intensity eased slightly, giving the audience a moment to breathe and reflect. The notes were gentle, almost fragile, yet filled with emotion. It was a delicate passage that contrasted with the powerful moments that had come before, showing her ability to convey a wide range of feelings. The young man felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected to be moved by someone he had teased only minutes before, yet here he was, caught up in the sheer beauty of her music. As the soft section continued, she subtly built it up again, layering notes with increasing complexity. The melody swelled and dipped, creating a sense of anticipation and excitement. The audience leaned forward instinctively, unable to resist the pull of the music. Even the youngest children were silent, their wide eyes fixed on the piano. People who had been skeptical, unsure, or simply casual attendees were now fully engaged. Every ear was attuned to the girl at the piano, every heart responding to the story she was telling through sound. The young man's friends whispered quietly among themselves, unable to believe what they were witnessing. "I've never seen anything like this," one said. Another nodded. "It's like she's telling a story without words." They were right. The girl's music was communicating emotions that words could never capture. Each chord, each pause, each subtle shift in tempo conveyed depth and meaning, drawing the listeners into a world that was entirely hers. Her performance then reached a climax. The music surged with energy, the notes flying across the keys in a display of skill, passion, and control. The young man watched in awe, realizing that this quiet girl, who had seemed invisible moments before, had completely transformed the room with her talent. The melody was powerful, but it never felt forced or showy. It was a natural, flowing expression of her skill and emotion, commanding attention not through volume or theatrics, but through sheer authenticity. People around the hall held their breath, caught in the intensity of the moment. Some were leaning forward, others had their hands clasped in front of them, and a few whispered softly, unable to find the words to describe what they felt. The young man felt a mix of emotions: surprise, admiration, humility, and a growing sense of respect. His joke had unintentionally led to a moment that would be remembered long after the day ended. Finally, she brought the music back to a gentle, soft ending. The notes lingered, fading slowly into the air. The audience was silent, still processing what they had heard. The young man felt a deep sense of gratitude and amazement. He had come to witness a simple joke turn into something extraordinary, and he understood now how wrong he had been to underestimate the quiet girl at the piano. She had not only played beautifully, she had shared a part of herself in a way that touched everyone present. For several moments, the hall remained still. People looked around at each other, unsure how to respond. The young man's friends exchanged wide-eyed glances, shaking their heads in disbelief. The girl closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and gently rested her hands on her lap. There was no arrogance, no demand for applause, just a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. She had done what she came to do not for recognition, but because the music needed to be played. The young man stepped closer, his expression a mix of humility and admiration. He finally understood that this was not a simple skill or hobby. It was a part of her, a gift that had waited patiently to be shared. He smiled softly, feeling a sense of awe and respect that he hadn't felt before. What had started as a joke had become a profound lesson about talent, courage, and the power of quiet determination. And in that hall, with the gentle echo of the piano still lingering, everyone realized that the quiet girl had done more than just play music. She had captured hearts, silenced doubts, and created a memory that would stay with them forever. The applause began slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the audience was still catching their breath. Then it grew louder and stronger, filling the hall with a warm, echoing sound. People were clapping, cheering, and even whistling, unable to contain their excitement and admiration. The quiet girl at the piano looked up, her expression calm but touched by the reaction. She didn't bow extravagantly or demand attention. She simply gave a small, humble smile, acknowledging the appreciation with grace. The young man who had joked moments before felt a mix of relief and amazement. Relief that she wasn't embarrassed, and amazement at the incredible talent he had just witnessed. He realized that his playful comment had unexpectedly sparked a moment of inspiration, not just for him, but for everyone in the hall. He stepped closer, unsure what to say, feeling awkward yet compelled to express his genuine admiration. "That was amazing," he said softly, almost to himself. He wasn't trying to flatter her. He meant every word. People started approaching her, asking questions about her music, her training, and how long she had been playing. Each question was met with quiet, thoughtful responses. She explained that she had learned the piano over many years and played in private most of the time, never really seeking attention or performing in front of large groups. Her modesty made the audience admire her even more. The young man watched, realizing how different she was from anyone he had expected to be at the piano. Her talent wasn't just skill. It was humility, patience, and dedication combined. The room buzzed with energy. Some people shared their excitement with friends sitting nearby, repeating phrases like, "Can you believe she did that?" and "I've never heard anything like it." Even the volunteers, who were used to seeing many performances at community events, exchanged surprised glances. The impact of her music lingered in the air, leaving everyone with a sense of awe. The young man's friends were still staring at her in disbelief. They whispered quietly, "We underestimated her completely. She's incredible," another added. The girl moved from the piano bench and stepped back slightly, letting the audience's attention fully acknowledge the music she had played. She didn't seek praise, but she accepted it with gentle composure. The young man felt a pang of guilt for having treated the moment as a joke. He realized how easily he could have dismissed someone remarkable simply because they were quiet, because they didn't draw attention to themselves. Watching her now, he understood that appearances could be deceiving, and real talent often hid in unexpected places. Parents who had been sitting quietly started telling their children about what they had witnessed. "See, sometimes people surprise you," one mother said, smiling at her child. "Even if they seem quiet or shy, they can do extraordinary things." Children who had been timid moments earlier now looked inspired, realizing that being unnoticed didn't mean being unimportant. The hall had transformed from a simple gathering into a place where curiosity, admiration, and respect thrived, all because of one person's courage to accept a challenge. The young man approached her finally, hesitating before speaking again. I didn't expect that," he admitted. "I really didn't know you could play like that." She nodded politely, her eyes calm and gentle. "I know," she said softly, almost with a smile. "Most people don't expect it, but that's okay." Her words weren't defensive or boastful. They were simply matter of fact, reflecting her confidence in her abilities and her comfort with herself. The young man felt a deep respect for her, understanding that true talent often comes with humility and patience. People started sharing their thoughts aloud, praising the emotion she had put into the performance. Some commented on how technically skilled she was, others on the feeling behind every note. Her music had reached them on multiple levels: skill, emotion, and storytelling, all at once. Even those who didn't play music themselves felt inspired. They realized that the quiet girl at the piano had opened their minds and hearts to something they had not expected, teaching a lesson about listening carefully, watching closely, and valuing hidden talent. Some of the audience members, still captivated, tried to capture the moment discreetly on their phones. They knew that videos couldn't do justice to what they had just experienced, but they wanted to remember it anyway. The young man noticed them and smiled slightly. Even technology, he realized, could only hint at the true depth of her performance. What mattered most was being present in the moment, witnessing it firsthand, and appreciating the courage and skill it took to share it so openly. The girl returned to her seat at the side of the hall, blending quietly into the room once again. She didn't need more attention. She had already shared her music and left a lasting impression. The young man watched her, feeling a mixture of humility and gratitude. He had learned a valuable lesson, not just about talent, but about respect, patience, and the importance of looking beyond first impressions. His playful joke had unintentionally led to something remarkable, and he was grateful to have been part of it. The atmosphere in the hall began to relax, though the energy lingered. People talked excitedly in small groups, sharing their favorite moments of her performance. Some replayed the melody in their minds, amazed at how it had moved them. Even those who had been skeptical at first were now believers, understanding that quiet, unassuming people could possess extraordinary abilities. The young man's friends were still in awe, quietly commenting on how they had misjudged her entirely. The girl, meanwhile, quietly observed the reactions around her. She seemed unaffected by the attention, focused instead on the feeling of having shared something important. Her eyes met the young man's briefly, and he gave a small, respectful nod. No words were needed. The moment had already spoken for itself. Everyone in the hall, from the youngest child to the oldest adult, had been touched by the authenticity and skill she had displayed. It was a reminder that true talent was often paired with humility, and that great moments often came from the most unexpected sources. As the crowd began to disperse gradually, people continued talking about the performance. Some planned to ask her to play at future events. Others simply wanted to remember the inspiration they felt. The young man lingered, feeling a mixture of pride and awe. Pride, because he had unwittingly given her the opportunity to shine, and awe because he had witnessed something truly remarkable. The day that had begun as ordinary had been transformed by her presence, her music, and her courage. By the time the hall emptied, the echo of applause and music still lingered. People left with smiles, quiet excitement, and a renewed appreciation for hidden talent. The young man stood for a moment, looking back at the piano, realizing that he had witnessed more than a performance. He had witnessed a story, a lesson, and a moment that would stay with him for a long time. He understood now that sometimes, the most unexpected events could teach the most valuable lessons, and the quietest voices could leave the deepest impact. The girl left quietly, unnoticed by many, carrying with her the sense of fulfillment that comes from sharing one's true passion. The young man finally spoke aloud, almost to himself. "I won't ever underestimate anyone like that again." His friends nodded, equally impressed and thoughtful. What started as a simple, playful joke had evolved into an unforgettable experience. A lesson in humility, respect, and the surprising power of hidden talent. As they walked away from the hall, the young man glanced at the empty piano bench and smiled softly. He knew that the memory of that day, of her playing, and of the reaction of everyone around, would stay with him for a long time. He realized that sometimes, the most meaningful moments in life came from unexpected places, and that true greatness often lay quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The quiet girl left the piano, her movements calm and unhurried. The hall was still buzzing with the energy of her performance, though people were no longer clapping. Instead, they sat or stood, quietly reflecting on what they had just experienced. The young man watched her walk across the room, feeling a mixture of admiration and humility. He realized that her music had done more than entertain. It had touched everyone on a deeper level, leaving an impression that would last far longer than the sound itself. As the audience began to gather their belongings, many of them paused to speak to the girl. They asked her questions about how she learned to play, what inspired her music, and whether she performed elsewhere. She answered politely, her voice soft but confident. She spoke not to impress, but to share her experience, to give insight into a world she had lived quietly for so long. Her humility only made her talent shine brighter in the eyes of everyone around her. The young man found himself at a loss for words. He had come with a playful, almost careless attitude, but he was leaving with a deep sense of respect and understanding. Watching her play had been a lesson in patience, in recognizing hidden talent, and in appreciating the quiet moments that often go unnoticed. He thought about the times he had overlooked people because they didn't draw attention to themselves, and he realized how wrong that had been. True talent, he saw now, often comes quietly, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Outside the hall, small groups lingered, talking quietly among themselves. They were replaying her performance in their minds, discussing the emotion, skill, and authenticity that had made it so remarkable. The young man's friends were still murmuring their astonishment. "I can't believe she did that," one whispered. Another nodded. "It's like she told a whole story without saying a single word." Their words reflected a shared understanding, that what they had witnessed was not just music, but an expression of something much larger: dedication, courage, and the courage to reveal one's true self. The girl moved to a quiet corner, gathering her sheet music and carefully placing it in her bag. She did not seek applause or recognition. Her satisfaction came from having shared something important, from having allowed her music to speak when words could not. The young man watched her, realizing that this kind of self-assuredness was rare. It wasn't about winning attention or proving oneself. It was about being authentic, about giving what she had to offer and trusting it would be enough. In the following days, her performance became the topic of conversation among those who had been present. People spoke about it with excitement and admiration, recalling details of the melodies, the pauses, and the emotions that had flowed so naturally. Some shared recordings, while others simply remembered the feeling of being there. The impact of her music extended beyond the hall, touching the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. It was clear that her talent was not only extraordinary but also transformative, leaving a lasting impression on the community. The young man continued to reflect on the event. He thought about how easily he could have missed this moment, how a careless joke could have led to embarrassment or dismissal. Instead, it had led to a revelation not just of talent but of character. He realized that people often underestimate what they do not immediately understand or notice. The girl had taught him that true skill does not need to be flashy to be powerful, and that quiet confidence often carries more weight than loud assertion. Weeks later, the girl's reputation quietly began to grow. Invitations to perform at local gatherings, schools, and events started to arrive. Each invitation was a recognition of her skill, yes, but also of her ability to connect with people through music. She remained humble, accepting only those opportunities that felt meaningful to her. She did not perform for fame or attention, but because she understood the value of sharing her gift and inspiring others. People who heard her play continued to speak of it with awe, often saying that it was impossible to believe someone so unassuming could produce such emotion and depth through music. The young man found himself thinking about the experience often. He realized that what he had witnessed went far beyond a simple performance. It was a lesson in respect, humility, and the recognition of hidden potential. He began to approach life differently, more aware of the people around him and the talents that often go unnoticed. His friends noticed the change in him too. He spoke more thoughtfully, listened more carefully, and gave others the space to shine. All of this had been sparked by a simple, unassuming act: the girl sitting at a piano and daring to play. Over time, the girl's story became an inspiration for many. Teachers, parents, and young students spoke of her example, encouraging those who were quiet or shy to pursue their passions. She showed that true talent does not need an audience to exist, but when shared, it can move people in ways that go beyond expectations. The young man shared his story too, explaining how a simple joke had led to a profound revelation. He spoke of the importance of giving people a chance, of noticing the quiet ones, and of recognizing that greatness often hides where it is least expected. The impact of that day endured. People who had been in the hall remembered not just the music, but the feeling of witnessing something extraordinary. They remembered the quiet girl, her calm demeanor, her skill, and the way she had transformed a casual gathering into a moment of shared inspiration. The young man, now more thoughtful and aware, carried the memory with him as a reminder that assumptions can be misleading, and that humility and talent often travel together. In the end, the story was not just about a piano performance. It was about courage, about quiet strength, and about the beauty of allowing one's true abilities to shine, even when the world does not expect it. The girl had done something remarkable. She had turned a moment of challenge into a moment of transformation, not just for herself, but for everyone who had the privilege to witness it. The young man and the audience left with hearts touched, minds opened, and a new understanding of the power hidden in quiet determination. Years later, those who had been there still spoke of the performance, not just as music, but as an experience that changed how they viewed talent and humility. The girl herself continued to play, always private yet profoundly impactful, showing that true greatness does not need to announce itself. It exists quietly, persistently, and when it emerges, it can touch the lives of many in ways no one could have imagined. The young man, now carrying the lesson with him, often thought back to that day, smiling quietly at how a small joke had revealed something so extraordinary and unforgettable.